Hey everybody, welcome back to Springrealms here on my lovely Patron server. So, last time we talked a little bit about mechanics and terrain and how things are going to work, as well as a few things that are in the works. And now I have another topic to discuss with regards to making dungeons, and that is implicit storytelling, otherwise occasionally known as environmental storytelling. Sometimes they're different things, other times they're the same, so just blanket. So yeah, the big thing that we know about this particular dungeon is that it was originally Erinys's garden. It was like Erinys's prime place to do flower arranging, growing like interesting new species, that kind of thing. And then it's been overtaken by this colossal bulb, which is the sprout of the vines, which will hold the original creeper that will be the boss for this particular dungeon. But what that means is that we actually have an area that Erinys spent a whole ton of time in, and consequently there are little hints and pieces around here as to what Erinys was up to. And the question here we have is, how do we convey this? How do we speak about Erinys through the language, as you will, of the topography, of the geography of this area? And the obvious thing is Erinys was a plant god, so the whole thing is just plants. But that doesn't actually tell us very much about Erinys as a person. So we have a few beacons around here, which are just sort of markers for where we have different buildings, a few prototypes of which are over there. And over here, I have completed one particular structure, which I think works very well as a small example of how you can do environmental storytelling or implicit storytelling, which is just the environment is telling you something. It's not like a wall of text, it's not an NPC telling you something, it's actually like you come here and you draw the conclusions based on what's happening. So this is very, very simple. This is... no, there's a creeper in there. This is basically just a gazebo. It's a little sheltered seating spot. And outside of it we have this campfire. Okay, fairly straightforward. It's a bit dilapidated, but we can see that there are three, or at least there used to be, three different benches around here. We can see there's a little flower over here, perhaps indicating that this is where Erinys themselves presumably preferred to sit. And it's all nice and cozy, or at least it would have been way back when. But if we find out the name of this particular campfire, so for example, any data at ER equals 5, we want custom name visible 1B. This is the conclave seats. Now, we know from the lore that Erinys was one of the three gods that believed Placitus's vision that destroyers were going to come out of the Spring of Souls. And they decided to go and make a poison that would destroy all of the souls inside of the Spring of Souls, so that couldn't ever happen. Now, the other two were Basilla and Placitus himself. We've met Basilla, so to speak, inside of the Corrupted Fortress. That's getting a massive overhaul down the line. I always have to remember to tell people that, but we've seen that poison. We've seen what that does. And we know that this decision is what inherently led to all of 12 of the gods dying irreparably. So here we have 3 seats in Erinys's domain, and the campfire next to it is called the conclave seats. So what we can intuit then, the kind of conclusion that we can draw, the storytelling that we're seeing, is that this is where they made the decision. This is where they decided to make the poison. This is where the end of the dozen gods started. So that is pretty heavy. But that is just like one small example of what you can do with implicit storytelling. So over here, we have planned another structure, which is a reading nook / angst corner. So it's sort of like, over there we have the decision to create the poison. And then over here, we'll have basically just this little comfy, reading corner that Erinys presumably came along to, write down stories about plants, or, read little stories maybe that one of the other gods has written down. I think it might have been Plastus at that stage. But then also Angst Corner. So we'll get maybe a little hint that maybe Erinus wasn't completely on board with this plan. Maybe Erinus, like... Erinus created life, but Erinus also created... Erinus was, like, the god of all of these plants, but Erinus is also responsible for creating creepers. So Erinus probably has more reason than most to be conflicted about the idea of destroying them all. So, that's another piece of implicit storytelling. That's a little less implicit because we actually do have, like signs and whatnot to put down here, that kind of thing. But maybe we can, like, do something about that. Maybe I'll see what I can come up with, what Aeneas and I can tinker with. And let me see, what else do we have around here? Over here, I think, is meant to be a greenhouse. And then over there is just sort of a destroyed tower that's been torn apart by the vines. And then over here, here we see Erinus' perhaps most conflicted nature, because here we have an overgrown hut. And a small hut doesn't really stick out very much. I mean, it's kind of in the corner here. Doesn't really mean terribly too much in and of itself, except that here is where you'll find a very particular tonic that will come in handy considerably against creepers in general, but also especially against the boss. Because here's where you get Weed Killer. Because we know from the lore on blast protection enchantment books that Erinus tried to rectify their mistakes of creating the creepers. So we know where Erinus, who was presumably pals with Basilla because they worked together on the poison, Erinus probably has some degree of experience in creating poison. Erinus probably has some degree of experience in creating something that ends life. In this case, a very specific kind of life, just these plant-based creepers, but nonetheless. So here you'll find some divine weed killer, as it were. And that's... Ooh, we can do so much with that, like, implication by itself. There's just, like... If you're building dungeons in the manner that Springrealms allows you to, then you can create so much, like, implication about the people that used to live here, that kind of thing. And let me see, what else? We've got a little bit of work. Well, obviously we've gotten the standing bulb. It looks a little bit like an upturned beetroot, but that's a bit hard to weed out, as it were. We've got the standing bulb here in which we will have our creeper boss. And then up here, we have the second version that will be present whenever the boss isn't respawned. Which we're still tinkering with a little bit, but yeah, I can see this looks quite different. So I like that that's going to be a feature. It's going to make that particular segment have the most complicated regen mechanic, like, circuit I've ever made so far, but we're only on Dungeon 3, so who knows. But it will also mean you can wander in and you can tell from a distance, like, whether or not the boss is present. And I'm also planning on tying in the spawning, at least, of the special creepers around here to the presence of the boss, which will mean that if you kill the boss, and this bulb goes away, then they won't despawn, I think, but you won't see them spawning anymore, so you'll just have regular creepers spawning. Which makes this place a bit more habitable when the boss is not around, which should be fun. C is not a valid number. Depends on who you ask. Physicists might disagree. But yeah. Let me see, what else can I talk about? We've got the rivers in, we've got the tree wall in that took me forever. Have we had any other changes here? I don't think so. Oh yes, this. I worked out this. So, over there is, like, the revised system for making, for functioning the stalkers, like, invisibility. But this is the function of the creeping spawners. So, basically, in Basilla, I have the Unthings, and the Unthings spawn from little armor stands that just detect people around them and basically function like a mob spawner as much as I could make them to at the time, except that they didn't have actual spawn limits. So what happens here is we set from the boss all of the creep spawners to have a timer value of 3. Timer, strictly speaking, is meant for a countdown, but I use it in a lot of cases as just a standard. Here is a calculation, and then from the boss again, all of the nearby creep spawners that are on grass sets their creep spawning score to 3. Okay? Are you with me so far? I probably need to like change that up because that's not quite right. But then, from the creep spawners, execute creepers nearby, remove 1 from their score if they're within 16 blocks. So every creeper within 16 blocks of a spawner tries to decrement its count towards 0. And then, if there's any that are above that, we summon a right creeper. So that is just the creep stalker there, very nice. Basically what that means is that these will continuously spawn creepers as long as there's less than like 3 creepers in their vicinity. That probably won't be the case, and I will definitely be changing that up to have a factoring in of player proximity, and also won't be constant because that will create a lot of creepers. But that is going to be a much more heavily revised system for how we do this, so that will hopefully make it so that we don't just get the massive horde of unthings that we did at the start of the Bacilla dungeon when that first opened up. There isn't anything really similar to this inside of Moriboka's dungeon. I did try to use the spawners, but I did not. I did not factor in that the actual like vanilla mob spawners will cause things to spawn outside of the areas that I want them to spawn. They'll spawn in mid-air, in fact, in a lot of cases. But yeah, I'm getting better and better at that, so hopefully this time it works flawlessly. But other than that, I think this is about it. Oh yes, we have changed when this particular dungeon opens. So you can see we've got a fair bit still to go, especially compared to that. We realized the 25th of this month, which is the original release date of this particular dungeon, was trepidariously close to Thanksgiving, which is not something that we experience here in the UK. We don't have a Thanksgiving, so naturally that didn't like blip on my radar as a thing to be concerned about. So instead, this one's actually opening up in the very early in the first week of December, which technically means that I've got less than a month to make the next dungeon after this, which I believe is Placitos's, and is also the first dungeon of the gold tier, which means it has 2 bosses. Oh boy. But yeah, that's gonna be fun. Anyways, hope you've enjoyed, and I shall catch you all next time.